Hello, and welcome to this Does This Look Purple to You edition of the Purple Journal podcast.
We've done that before, haven't we?
Sounds familiar.
The thing is that we have, but nobody heard it because, full disclosure, the show didn't record last week, and it was one of the best shows of all time. I was witty. I had all these topics that completely stumped both of you. It was just like the best show ever. And
that's funny because I thought I was just killing it last week with my takes. It was unbelievable. You know, they've talked all week about how Case Keenum played a near perfect game. It's really an amazing feeling when you have a near perfect podcast.
Yep.
And then it's dashed by unnamed person who shall be tech shamed from here on forth, if that's a thing. Can you tech shame somebody? I guess I just did. So
I think the only thing that's true that we've said so far on this episode is that we lost the last show. Everything else really is lies, and they're not very, very convincing ones.
Buzz Killington! Luke, you're Buzz Killington!
But, yeah, it was a good week. Last week's show that's out in the ether somewhere was a little more muted in terms of our mood, just because of the way the game went against the Panthers, and we covered it actually really in depth, and it was a great show, and that was really unfortunate. But the Vikings bounced back as we all expected them to against Zimmer's former team, and they didn't really put up much of a fight, but
pretty sad actually.
It cleansed the palates of a lot of the people, whether they're, I know you guys aren't big on the national impression of this team, but it was for people like me that like to read national media's takes on our stuff, it was nice to see them kind of get back in the Vikings corner a little bit and talk about how great the defense is. And it was a super convincing win. Teddy came back, which was awesome. Joe, you were at the game since you have a press pass. And
that's with derision.
Well, of course.
Yes, yeah, it was. It was. I remember remarking to Sam Ekstrom, who sits next to me. In the second quarter, I said, "I've never seen so many wide open receivers in a game in my life." I mean, they just totally. They screwed up on the Bengals. Screwed up so many times on defense. I mean, they didn't even know that Jerick McKinnon was on the field apparently, and it was it's like they talk about mailing it in. You wanted the Vikings to get up early, or get up big early and take the wind out of their sails. Well, boy, that happened after the first drive. It was all downhill from there for the Bengals. But it was the whole time it was building towards Teddy coming out there, which was really nice to see. And
that had to be like one of the top moments from like a personal viewing standpoint of like something you've witnessed in stadium. Like with them chanting his name and all of the emotion behind that had to be pretty cool.
It really was. And then you saw all the different Vikings, jumping up and down and trying to get the crowd going. The crowd was already into it. And Teddy, he relished it. He took his time walking out there. I think he was somewhat overwhelmed at the same time. And I think if you really, people come back from injury before, but when you really focus in on what a devastating injury and what a horrendous, a difficult rehab he came back from, to see him walk out there in uniform and line up, what was a neat thing. And the crowd was showing exactly how much they love Teddy Bridgewater. It was great to see.
It was really sweet. I was at the bar I'm usually at in Sherman Oaks out here, and we were going nuts when he came out on the field. And he didn't really do much. He didn't really look like the Teddy we watched before, but it doesn't really matter. It was only 2 passes, and it was just good to see him get out there. And from a strategic standpoint, that's something that is always good if you are a Super Bowl contending team. You're at the top of your conference and you're blowing someone out in December. Get your backup a few reps just to make sure that if you do need to call on him, he's that much less rusty.
I hope that they take care of business on Saturday so that they can chill next weekend against the Bears and give him maybe even a half or a quarter anyway. And you want Keenum to play just to keep tuned up because they're hopefully going to get a bye. You don't want him to take 2 weeks off. But I would hope to see Teddy Bridgewater out there in the second half of that game for a good spell, just so you really get an idea what you got at him, because he did look a little skittish, which is understandable. Suddenly the speed of someone charging after him it's gonna throw you a little bit, and he sailed his pass a little bit high and maybe a little early or whatever, and he turned into an interception. But the second pass was right on the money. For the most part was on the money, and I think Floyd should have had it. But
yeah,
that first rep was really bad. His footwork in the pocket was bad. He was skittish in a clean pocket, and then he fired one. And he fired one he didn't set his feet. He had his shoulders square to the receiver, and that's a really good way to throw a ball high and have it tipped into an interception, which he'll see that on tape and then know, that's something that you can kind of get out of your system and chalk it up to jitters. But now he'll have less jitters next time he goes out if we have to call on him. So
I hope it was jitters, not fear.
Yeah, it was just haven't been out there in a while. First passing rep out there in a while and getting used to the speed of it again.
So, well, real quickly, my name's Joe Johnson. I own purplePTSD.com and VikingsTerritory.com. And I'm here with Joe Oberle, who writes for purplePTSD.com and the Sports Post, and that is Luke Braun, who writes for purplePTSD and also co-hosts the Pocket Protectors podcast. I read some narratives that were basically saying the cliche, they got to show the rest of the league what Teddy can do also. I don't even know how that would work, considering he's a free agent, if the assumption is they would sign and then trade him to somebody, or even kind of what the rationale there is. But we've been really focused on this season and the next team up on this show. For a lot of reasons, not wanting to delve into the playoffs too much too early or jinx the team or whatever, but as the season, is coming to a close, and as Keenum has shown that he can obviously run this offense really, really well, almost basically perfectly against the Bengals.
Yeah, he didn't have the hardest job. I'd push back on the perfect thing a little bit. Like he did the easy job very well and deserves credit for that. But they forgot to cover Jerick McKinnon and their linebackers quit, and so he just swung. He didn't do a very hard thing. Still good to not screw that up. And yes, take the 30-yard play. That is the correct decision. But I'm not handing out any lollipops for that.
Yeah, I look at the Diggs touchdown.
That play was absurdly good.
That was a nice,
totally different play.
And
it was a very difficult play to make it that open. Looking off the safety is a tough ask, and then making that throw, that was a dime.
I don't want to rag on Teddy or anything, even though I've always been kind of the anti-Teddy guy, for lack of a better definition. But that's the type of throw that I don't remember seeing Teddy making that often, or as often as Keenum's been able to make it. And so at this point, I just wonder what your guys' thoughts are on, regardless of how the season ends, where the team is at with these two quarterbacks. I mean, it is kind of a pending, gigantic, not disaster, but something they have to deal with.
Certainly not a disaster. I mean,
it's a good position to be in, but it's still
a problem to have. Yeah, I that's why I guess I said earlier about hopefully he gets in there in the Bears game, because the Vikings really need to see what they have in him, and I would really like to see Teddy be just as good as they said he has been in practice. You never know, how much of that is exaggeration or what, but I would love to see them sign Keenum as your starter and Teddy as your backup, and then they can go after it and see who's the guy going forward. I mean, even as much as I'd love to see Sam Bradford part of the equation, I know economically you can't do all that, but he's probably done anyway. But that's, I guess, for me, that's the best case scenario. If he can play that well, you have a backup that good, and you sign him to a lesser contract, and he builds his back, maybe a short-term one, and give him a chance to leave after he has put some decent film out there. But I guess that's what I'd like to see happen. Keenum has been good enough that I think they need to reward him.
There's some people who are really good at analyzing salary cap stuff who have said that it's definitely possible to keep both into the offseason and then have a preseason competition, I think that would be the best scenario. And if you can't keep both, then I don't know what you do. I think you just have to kind of trust the coach's evaluation at that point, which they're working off information we don't have, so it's kind of hard to opine there.
Yeah. You don't want Zimmer getting in there with his emotions and his love for Teddy, and that. And I don't think he'll do that. Ultimately, I think he'll make the right decision for the team. But that's a part of it too. And I'll bet if they win the Super Bowl, knock on wood, I bet he starts loving Keenum a heck of a lot too.
Yeah, I don't care if they win the Super Bowl. We can get Flacco'd. I don't care.
Yeah, it does not matter. I mean, we can run the team into the ground for all I care. Just one ring.
It'd be funny to think that people are going to be potentially courting all 3, maybe even 4 quarterbacks that are on the Vikings roster.
That was my follow-up question. With the dearth of quarterbacks in the league, you have to figure that Teddy might get a better offer somewhere else, and it's just a matter of whether or not he wants to stay with the team that he's developed with and the coaching staff, or if he might want to take a bigger paycheck somewhere else and a guaranteed starting job.
I actually don't think he will get a better contract anywhere else, because right now I think the biggest thing that he has going for him is good practice, which we've heard from Zimmer and from other players that he looks good in practice and he doesn't, and he looks like himself out there and everything like that. And the only people who have seen that are the Vikings. The other teams basically just have these 2 bad reps and speculation to go off of. So I feel like the Vikings would be willing to get Teddy more than any other team will get him. And plus the quarterback market is very, very crowded. Kirk Cousins, Eli Manning, not to mention potentially Bradford and Keenum, and I think Blake Bortles might hit the market. There's a lot of people who are going to be around in the market and a crowded draft class. So if I'm a quarterback, I don't know if this is the year I want to try to enter the market and get my contract. He could be the 6th, 7th, 8th quarterback on that list and just end up being a backup for someone, or a Mike Glennon situation.
You've always said, Luke, that this offense fits both Keenum and Teddy. They both could run it well. It kind of fits their strengths.
Yeah.
So
they have similar strengths.
You're right, and that's something that Teddy will certainly consider too. I mean, wherever he would go, he'd have not only would he have to overcome whatever he has to do to play, he's got to learn a new system and kind of start over in that regard. So,
isn't it really strange though that we're even at the beginning of this season, at training camp, to imagine that we'd be talking about Case Keenum being the number 1 guy and getting a huge contract extension. It's just you still have, I don't know about you guys, I've been pretty pro Keenum for the last few weeks, and I've kind of abandoned all my fears about him kind of falling back to earth, but you still it's Case Keenum in your head, so you're kind of thinking, well, what's going to happen next year? He'll probably just end up being Case Keenum again, and then we'll be screwed. So it's just, it's awesome, but it's also kind of scary.
I have come to him slowly and gradually, and saying, and becoming a Keenum believer. I still have, as you say, Keenum in the back of my head. I've seen him, make many head-scratching throws. I mean, he missed a wide-open pass in the early going and threw into some questionable coverage. So he has that potential, but he's done so much other things so well that you have to give him the benefit of the doubt. And it's like Luke said, is this awesome fit? This offense fits him perfectly, and so. I'm bullish on him. I'm ready to ride him.
Well, look at the Bengals game, like Luke kind of just explained when I used the word perfect, because of his completion percentage being damn near 90% and all of that. It is a matter of him fitting into the system perfectly and everything in that regard. So it's not necessarily that he's playing at a Tom Brady level, but just that the team is basically stacked enough to where competent quarterback play is making them a contender. So
he's playing above Tom Brady in QBR.
they haven't asked Case Keenum to do like super heroic things all year outside of a couple of games. I think the Thanksgiving game he was asked to do some pretty cool stuff, and the Washington game he was asked to do some good stuff. But they've also shown that like they can consistently not ask him to do difficult things and win games against good teams, and then they can ask him to not do very difficult things against bad teams and hang a 34-7 drubbing on them and make them quit in the game at halftime. So it's like, he doesn't have the hardest job. Also, that's fine, and it doesn't matter, and is totally sustainable.
Definitely. This is still a really young team. We're getting Dalvin Cook back next year. I think one of the biggest factors, and Luke, you wrote an article about this this week that ties into what we're talking about, and we did touch on this, I think, 2 weeks ago on the show as well, but the fact that still kind of depending on what happens with the postseason, Pat Shurmur being eyed as a head coaching candidate for next season with all the turnover that happens there. Do you want to kind of just explain what you wrote and your views on that situation? And obviously, so Shurmur is getting a lot of buzz now as a head coaching candidate, even more since I posted this article yesterday morning. So I looked at yeah, right. I shouldn't have done it, but I reverse jinxed it. The jinx is real, guys. But I looked at other head coaching candidates or second chance head coaches throughout the league, guys like Doug Marrone, Mike Mularkey, Pete Carroll, guys who had been a head coach before, got fired, and now are a head coach again, and I looked at how they got there. And from what I found, there's, I guess, 3 ways that you can kind of get back into the head coaching world after you've been fired. Is, for one, spend a lot of time doing something elite, like Jack Del Rio coached an elite Broncos defense a few years ago, got back into the head coaching ring. Pete Carroll was an elite college coach for like 10 years. You can have an interim audition. That's kind of what Mike Mularkey and Doug Marrone did, where they just ended up in organizations where they were the most experienced guy after the head coach got fired. They got an interim audition. They nailed it. I don't think Pat Shurmur checks either of those boxes. He had a great year this year, but most of the second chance head coaches do it for like 2 or 3 years, or Pete Carroll took 10 years at USC to get back into the NFL. And then there are some other weird situations like Jim Caldwell and Hugh Jackson that are basically be hired by a super dysfunctional organization, and that basically means be hired by Cleveland. And if Cleveland does fire Hugh Jackson, I highly doubt Jimmy Haslam will go back to the guy that he fired almost immediately upon buying the team. So I don't think Cleveland's dysfunction is an option for him. So if Pat Shurmur did become a head coach in the league, and he's got, there are way better candidates out there. There's Wade Phillips, there's Josh McDaniel, there's, young upstarts like Terrell Austin is a name that gets thrown around every year. But if he does get hired, it would be unprecedented for a bunch of reasons. Nobody has gone 9-23 in a head coaching tenure and then gotten another chance. Nobody has really
had no way. The worst was Hugh Jackson, who went 8-8 for his 1 year. Everybody else had winning records, or then there's like the Andy Reids of the world that like had long tenures of success.
I guess I'm thinking of like guys who went back from head coaching to coordinator positions. You know what I mean? Yeah, they went to coordinator positions and they did well, but like Jim Caldwell was largely credited with the offensive turnaround that led to the Ravens winning a Super Bowl a few years ago. Pat Shurmur, I don't think, because like he took over mid-season, Jim Caldwell did, and won the Super Bowl. I feel like if we won the Super Bowl in 2016 under Pat Shurmur, then he would probably get head coaching looks. But otherwise, it takes a lot to wipe away the stink of a failed head coaching tenure, especially one that was failed so spectacularly, like Shurmur's time in Cleveland. And even though maybe he would make a good head coach, and we as Vikings fans can see, like, hey, his scheme's really good. His scheme's working really, really well, and it doesn't ask the quarterback to do much, and you can still be successful, and that's super valuable. And maybe, he should be a head coach, but the league just doesn't really work that way. He has a lot more to prove. And
what about the other side of the coin? If does he want to be a head coach. I mean, sometimes the skill set required, we find out is so much different than being a coordinator. And most often, at least it didn't happen here with Zimmer, but most often coordinators come in and to be head coaches, and then they give that job to somebody else, a coordinator. And thankfully, Zimmer's hung on to his defensive coaching role because that's what's built this defense and turned it into what it is. But I'm hoping, after what I've seen this year from Shermer as an offensive coordinator, how they've taken the offense and, granted, got a new offensive line, blah, 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 all that. I would love to see him do it for a second year. I mean, I think he's really good at his position, and if he became a head coach, he's probably not doing that anymore. I mean, there's too much else to handle. You can't, some of them call the plays, but I don't know. I'm hoping that he, thinks, I need to chill out for a while and build myself back up and see if it's what I want, because it is such a completely different things you have to do. You have to then really have to manage those personalities, and we saw how Zimmer struggled with that when he came in here. At least last year he did, and he's learned from it. But I would think, I would say you almost got to, in this league, so many changes happen every year. Every team is new each year, that they better go out and win it this year, because he may in fact be gone, or you're not going to have the same team next year for how many reasons, so whatever. I he sticks.
And that was my point when we talked about this a couple weeks ago, saying I understand that these guys really believe in what they're doing, and to succeed in a job that you work 100 hours a week, you have to have the certain mindset that you know what you're doing enough that you should be in charge of everything, and that's part of the game on the field and for coaches. But you would think that a guy that's been passed around the league and had as many jobs as years before he landed here, not literally, but close enough, that he would take the job security over the fact that he could go to a team that doesn't have the pieces in place that the Vikings do, and then end up without a job in 2 or 3 seasons, as is the average lifespan of NFL coaches these days. I know it doesn't work that way, but you think that it's the same thing with like college coaches that come to the NFL when they have a lifetime contract for millions of dollars. You think that they would just stick with it, but there's a lot of ego involved. I guess my point is that how much of it is really Shermer, and how much of it is the fact that this Vikings team does have a lot of amazing pieces to play with that other teams might not have.
I give Shermer a lot of credit.
Yay.
Because I don't think the personnel is as good as the offense is. Like, Diggs and Thielen are elite, and I think they're as good, but the offensive line is not a top 5 unit. The quarterback is not a top 5 quarterback. It's it's not like he's working with Drew Brees and the Cowboys offensive line and everything is easy. He lost Dalvin Cook at the beginning of the year. He lost Sam Bradford, who did the whole training camp at the beginning of the year. The offensive roster, I think, with other schemes, wouldn't be as successful as it's being. I give Shermer a lot of the credit for the success that we've been having.
Which is very interesting how you've come to that earlier this year, because
things got better.
You were more skeptical in the beginning of the year, and so that gives what you're saying credence. You really, I do too. I think he's been amazing, and I never knew coming in how good he was going to be, and because I guess I spent too much time focusing on last year when he was actually running Norv Turner's offense. Well, give him the chance to run his own. He's really shown that he has the chops, and he's really he's taken the offense to a new level.
And isn't that really the best way to juxtapose or just explain what a great job he's done, comparing him to Norv Turner, a guy who is kind of the poster boy for having head coaching opportunities and basically being employed consistently for 35 years because he was a part of that Air Coryell offense. So he's always going to have a job, and he, a guy that.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, Turner's obviously a Hall of Fame guy, and he had essentially the same components on offense, just with the offensive line notwithstanding, and he threw in the towel because he couldn't figure it out. And,
well, he couldn't run his offense. They wanted to change it.
Yeah.
They wanted to adjust, and he wanted to pound the rock with his running backs, and they didn't have the running game last year.
Yeah.
Right, and then he threw his hands up instead of changing. That is one huge difference. Is it does seem like Shermer has been willing to change and adapt. He is doing things this year that he did not do previously in his career. The misdirection is not something we saw last year. It's not something we saw during his time in St. Louis or in Cleveland. The no huddle seems to be something that he took from Chip Kelly's arsenal, and they've been using like up tempo offense a lot more. So the fact like Pat Shermer has been willing to adapt, and Norv Turner never was. Norv Turner was a giant ego, and I think the further removed we get from his tenure, the more little stories and anecdotes we hear about how he just wasn't budging on anything, even though it wasn't working.
Speaking of the no huddle, I mean, that first drive last week, I kept watching the defense of the Bengals. Granted they mailed it in or whatever, but they were so confused. They didn't know how. They were constantly shifting, trying to get lined up with what they saw coming. They were not ready. It was a masterful drive. I thought they just moved down the field and had those guys so confused. I thought the game was over from that point on. So I didn't realize it got it from Chip Kelly, but it makes sense, and it was great to see. They were Keenum ran it really well.
And that's
there was a play where Treadwell was triple covered, and nobody covered Jerick McKinnon, and it was one of his 35-yard runs. They had no idea what they were doing, and they had no linebackers.
Maybe their game plan was
out of them.
Not to let Treadwell get his fourth catch.
There was a point. It was a mesh concept, and two linebackers flowed with Treadwell, and then another linebacker, a corner, was ready to pick him up, and nobody could cover Jerick McKinnon, and he went for 40 yards.
I heard Pat Shermer talking on the radio today. He does this thing on KFan, and Paul Allen asked him about the Searles touchdown, and I can't remember what he asked him, but he said, about fooling them or whatever. He goes, well, actually, they double covered Searles.
They did. I saw that. That was hilarious. They double covered Searles, and then both David Morgan and Kyle Rudolph were wide open.
I know, it was hilarious. He goes, you're going to have to ask them about that. That's a defensive
playing against Downs.
It was so funny.
So, we've touched on the fact that the Bengals were kind of thinking more about
the Bungles.
Thinking more about the offseason, and I know it was announced after the game that Marvin Lewis is going to resign after the season. But it was just from a standpoint of bouncing back from the Panthers game, it was really great just to see that the team was firing on all cylinders and was basically looking like the team that was on the 8-game winning streak. There's only 3 games left, or there were before the Bengals game, and you want to be playing your best football in December, and it seems like that's kind of what they brought back in the Bengals game. So it was a good game. And Joel, you mentioned off air, in talking about playoff scenarios and home field and all that, one of my biggest concerns with the Metrodome and moving to US Bank Stadium was that it wasn't going to have the same home field advantage in regards to the noise level. And I think you mentioned that it was the loudest maybe you've ever heard it there, or...
Well, certainly at this stadium. I to be honest, I can't compare it to what I heard in 1978 and 1991, or 1987 and 1991 with the Twins. It's pretty loud then, but it was the Rams game and the Bengals game early on. It was just as loud as I've ever heard it there. And people have been comparing it decibel-wise. I heard it was the highest for the Metrodome was 119, and this was 118 on the meter.
Nice.
So it was right up there with it. And someone was describing it as, one of the players is that, that's the way it is over on the sides, but when you get down in the middle of this field, it comes cascading down on you. And even Teddy was having trouble getting the play call from the bench that on the time that he went in, he couldn't hardly hear it. And, so in some ways, it may have the potential to even be louder than the Dome. I don't know, but it certainly was darn close. After those 2 games, I thought.
Well, they claim that roof material is acoustically created, so it like amplifies the sound that bounces off of it. But I had heard from some people that the stadium was just too large inside, so the sound couldn't really kind of meet up with other parts of the stadium's sound. It was kind of just, hitting the field from different angles as opposed to meshing together. But that's going to be a huge component of how the Vikings play in the playoffs. And
yeah, the loudest they said it was in the Metrodome was that Dallas playoff game when Favre beat him in 2009.
That might have been my favorite playoff game ever.
I was there. That was fun.
You were at that game?
Yeah, me too.
Oh.
And I was watching it, so I got to. In the press box, you can't yell. You can't out in the stands, so it was great fun.
So before we talk about the playoffs a little bit, we should also mention that the Vikings did tie up the division with their win against the Bengals, which is I know the players I read had like a muted. It's not really even a celebration in the locker room, Joe. I don't know if you were in the locker room after the game, but it was just
not.
Okay.
I heard. Well, hey, go ahead.
No, you have.
I was gonna say I heard that before the media was let in, you could hear them in there cheering and yelling and having their little celebration. But as soon as the doors opened, they said, "Okay." They put on the shade came down and they put on their one game at a time. We got bigger goals, blah blah blah.
Yeah, this is the first on the checklist or whatever.
Yes. Which I agree to a certain extent.
But that's pretty cool. I mean, how many people? There was a lot of. I know you guys don't put a lot of stock into this stuff, but preseason, predictions that the Vikings were going to finish third in the division behind the Packers and the Lions and stuff like that. So it has to be gratifying for them. It's great for Zimmer.
No one believed in us.
This team's overcome a lot, so it's actually pretty amazing that we're not super excited about the division because we have bigger goals as fans.
Yeah, it always seems it always just seemed like they had their sights set so much higher.
Yeah.
And I think that's after, the last 2 years. I mean, they won the division 2 years ago and should have beat the Seahawks in the playoffs. And then the next year they start out 5-0. They knew what kind of defense they had. They knew how good they were or could be. And then for all these incredibly bizarre happenings taking place, from your OC resigning midseason and one head coach losing one of his eyeballs and on and on and on, all the injuries. I think they still believe, because the core is still here, and they just said, okay, we got to fix up this offensive line, we got to fix up this, get this offense going. The rushing game was 32nd in the league last year, and they went out and drafted a rookie running back with their first pick in the second round, and they got even better. And so I think they've had that, and they've just probably been frustrated, and they know what can happen in a season and how focused you have to stay. And I mean, there was plenty of smiling faces when they won the division out in the field. I mean, look at Case Keenum, who's never been to a playoff game before. He was pretty excited. And so, but I think Zimmer's going to keep them back down to earth and grounded and saying, there's a lot more to do here yet, fellas. So I think that's what's going on.
Well, speaking of coaches getting basically job opportunities for their entire lives, you have to think that Zimmer, in addition to Shermer, the biggest thing in today's NFL, especially this season, is adaptability when it comes to, basically everything. But when you have players getting injured or what have you, and having these coaches basically being able to overcome that much different stuff and succeed at this level is got to kind of put the rest of the NFL on alert. So we talked about off air a little bit about the playoff scenarios with the second seed. It would have been really, really cool had the Eagles actually lost to the Giants. I know they were losing. They announced it during the broadcast that while the Eagles were losing to the Giants, they announced it in the stadium, and people were going crazy about that too. But it's looking like the second seed is going to be where we end up. Luke, you kind of explained it a lot better than I'm trying to. Kind of what the scenario is with Carolina and what needs to happen. And
Yeah, the 1 seed's pretty much out of reach. We would have to win out, and the Eagles would have to lose out, and the Eagles have the Raiders, and then I think they're at home against a Cowboys team that just lost Tyron Smith for the year. So that it'd be hard to imagine them losing both those games. But for the bye, basically win out and we get the bye, lose out and we don't. That's pretty easy. But if we're 12-4, if we go 1-1 through these next two, it'll come down to tiebreakers. And there are 3 other teams that matter. The Saints, the Panthers, and the Rams all can be 12-4. So if in pretty much every tie scenario, the Vikings have the tiebreaker. We actually have really good tiebreakers over all of those teams. So if there's 3-way ties or all kinds of weird parties, the Vikings come out of all of it with the bye. The only way we don't is if it's just mano-a-mano, us and the Panthers, because they beat us and they have the head-to-head. But like if the Panthers win the division at 12-4 and the Vikings are 12-4 and then the Rams also win out and they're 12-4, because the Rams joined the party and the 3-way tiebreaker rules are different, we get the bye. So essentially just root for outside of the Vikings winning out, which they probably should at this point. But if they don't, if they drop one of these games, root for the Rams to win out, or the Saints to win out, or the Panthers to lose one. If any one of those 3 things happen, then the Vikings are 12-4 if they get a bye.
Ooh.
The Eagles have 2 home games, and
they're 2 home games.
Yeah. So they're that one's very slim to none chance. But Zeke is coming.
The Cowboys are technically still alive for the playoffs, I think. So they might, if they win this week and they're still alive, they might be pumped for that game. So you never know. I mean,
it's definitely feasible to see them lose in the divisional round, and then we would have a home NFC Championship anyways.
And I was gonna say, I wonder if this shakes out the way that it's looking, if there's ever been a scenario like this where the Vikings have basically played every other team that's in the playoffs outside of the number 1 seed being the Eagles. If it's gonna be the Saints, Falcons, Rams, Panthers. Is that right?
Yeah, it could be the Cowboys and the Seahawks still have a shot, and the Lions still have a shot. But it's looking like
Cowboys and Seahawks play each other this week, actually.
Ooh.
Yeah, so they'll knock each other out, and it's looking the best for the Falcons to win that
right.
6th seed.
So I hate to say
it's got to be unique, Joe. I'm sorry. Say it's got to be unique, Joe. That's happened. I'm sure it probably hasn't to some degree. I think I will say though that the Vikings have played the Saints so long ago that I think it was a different team because they had Adrian Peterson disease where they had to get him into the lineup, and if it had been all Kamara going after the Vikings, it might have been a different outcome. Who knows?
They hadn't figured their defense out either. They had Kenny Vaccaro playing primarily safety, and they didn't have it. Like Kenny Vaccaro has played more slot corner now, which has been much better for him, and they've got a lot of other players that just hadn't quite figured out chemistry together, and they've done some shuffling. So they're a much different team.
Yeah, they added a lot of people in the offseason to their defense, didn't they?
Yeah, they had a couple draft picks. Marcus Williams, which was a safety that I wanted, but I think he went before we ever picked, was their 2nd-round pick, and he's been absolutely lights out. He's been one of the top 10 safeties in the league.
And don't they have a cornerback that made the Pro Bowl?
Yeah, Marcus Lattimore. Yeah, he actually did okay against Julio. He did okay against a couple other really good corners. He actually played decently in our game, even though it was his first NFL game. He was able to keep up with Thielen, and I bet he'd do better than he did that week 1 game if we met in the playoffs.
Would you guys say that's the team you fear the most?
Yes.
I kind of do.
I don't fear anybody a lot, though. I think we're the best team in the NFC.
Yeah, I mean, I don't follow the rest of the league like you guys do, obviously, but I always keep looking back at the Patriots just because they're the Patriots. But when it comes to the NFC, there's familiarity there. The home field advantage is going to be huge. If we end up playing the Saints, can you imagine?
Yeah, there'd be a lot of. Every nightmare that's ever haunted Minnesota Vikings fans will come floating into their into their dreams. Oh my goodness! I've already thought about that.
Yeah.
They're playing better. I would agree. I'd say the Vikings are a better team, but you want to get them on your home field and scream the heck out of to get them. They're a good team, and they're going to see a different ball player if they were to play with Kamara on the field. He's going to get a lot more carries, and should be interesting if it happens.
If you want to start speculating about who the Vikings would play in a scenario where they're probably going to get the bye, there's too many things that need to go wrong for them to not, and most of them are out of their ability to choke it away. So right. if you can say, okay, Vikings will get the bye, who are they going to play? Since they'll be the 2 seed, that means that if whoever is the 3 seed wins their game, that's who comes to Minnesota. The 3 seed will likely be the Rams because the Rams beat the Saints and get that tiebreaker. So it's a decent shot of us getting a rematch against the Rams. If the Rams lose their game, then we get whoever wins between the 4th and 5th seed, which would probably be the winner of Saints-Panthers, and in my opinion would be a tougher game.
I couldn't argue with that.
So, yeah, then you're looking at Saints-Panthers in the NFC Championship, since the Eagles obviously are missing their best player.
Yeah, there you go. Well, Saints-Panthers look like they're on a collision course to play in the wild card weekend.
Really?
Yeah. That's how things are seeding out right now. A lot of stuff can change because all the NFC South teams play each other, so they could all knock each other around and make stuff different. But right now it looks like the Saints are careening toward the 4th seed, and the Panthers are going to be that 5th seed good wild card. And that'll be a really fun game. And then if the Rams win their playoff game against the Falcons, or if the Lions come out of nowhere and take it, the Rams would come here, and then the Saints-Panthers winner would go to Philadelphia. And that actually is probably my favorite scenario because I like all those very, very good teams beating each other up, and I think we can take the Rams.
This is, you said so much can happen in these next 2 weekends, and which is one of the greatest things about the NFL. You got 16 game seasons, and you got so many so many teams that are still in it right down to the end. And things can change week to week. You can't necessarily count on anything. I mean, the Vikings have set themselves up in such a good position, as you pointed out, that too much would have to change in order for them to lose, too much playoff seedings. But you got to love it about the NFL that it's going to get nuts these next 2 weeks. It's a great time to watch football.
It just really does feel like it's going to be Vikings-Saints in the NFC Championship. I'm going to call that right now. I also... it's
a good call.
I think that it'll be interesting to see. I don't think the NFL necessarily thought that the Vikings would be around at this point, and they probably wanted to start prepping the stadium for the Super Bowl, so I bet they're
starting to freak out, Joe.
Don't start to freak out?
The Super Bowl committee is starting to freak out because they do not want an NFC championship in the same place that they're hosting the Super Bowl. Yeah, that's crazy.
In my mind, I go back to what we were talking about on the Phantom show last week, which was Joe. You mentioned something about the refs and kind of favoring the home team, and it just. I fear, and I don't rationally think this is happening, but there's so much irrational that comes with covering this team that I get afraid that there's a motive to get the Vikings out of the playoffs as quickly as possible so they can start setting up the stadium for the Super Bowl. That it scares me. But beyond that, speaking of irrational things, Harrison Smith didn't make the Pro Bowl. How's that for a segue?
Yeah, I got real heated about this on the Pocket Protectors, and you should go listen to that. We talked a lot about the value of defensive players, and it sparked a pretty interesting discussion about, could a defensive player ever win MVP? But I went on a whole tirade about Harrison Smith's production and how I don't think you can find another safety in this league that is doing the number of things that he does, the variety of things that he does, and he does them all well. He's if you had Earl Thomas, but you could turn him into Cam Chancellor when you need to. That's who Harrison Smith is.
What is the issue there? Is it because he's so good that you don't hear his name that often?
And because
yeah, he's not
so
targeted.
laid back. He's so, I mean, as a personality, he's not ever. He not laid back's probably long term. He's underspoken. He's quiet spoken. He's not out there with his face in the camera, pounding his chest when he makes a play. He makes the play and he goes back to his position, and he doesn't just draw your attention. He just does his job week after week after week after week, and he does it so well. And so it's a popularity contest, and that's why I don't get too worked up about it. As the Vikings, all said in the locker room, they were getting questioned about the Pro Bowl snubs in the locker room today, and they're all kind of mad about Kyle Rudolph not getting in again, and but they know what it is. They're looking past it, and it's an easy thing to say, but the fact that Smith is not in there is just, it's amazing. And
has he made to the Pro Bowl before?
He got put in as an alternate last year.
Okay. Yeah. I always thought that the adage was, like, for first-time guys, they always make it the year after they're supposed to. Like, it takes the league a year to catch up to them, but it's like Harrison Smith
should have made it last year, too.
I know.
He should have.
He's so good for so long that doesn't really apply.
And the coaches know that. That's why they put him on the team after someone bows out. But, it doesn't, I really
that'll probably happen this year.
Be playing in it anyway,
Yeah.
You want him to be playing in the Super Bowl. So.
They also snubbed Linval Joseph, which is really interesting because Linval's a nose tackle, and every single defensive tackle in the Pro Bowl is a 3-tech. So that means Damon Harrison, who I actually think is better than Linval, K'Wan Short, who's in that conversation, bunch of Brandon Williams, a lot of guys who should be getting recognition are not, because they simply just don't play the flashy 3-tech position that gets all the sacks. They play the run stuffer, eat double teams position, which Linval is just so good at, especially on lateral runs. But he plays a position that just isn't in the Pro Bowl. It's like being a special teamer.
A corollary to that, the Vikings defense is all about team defense, and they have become even more so as the year goes on. I mean, for the first 10 games, everybody's talking about Everson Griffin getting a sack every game. Well, he hasn't gotten that many lately because they're all playing such team defense, and no one really stands out. And Brian Robeson got 2 sacks in the first quarter or first half last week. So it's Linval's not going to stick out as some guy, and it's a shame, but because Zimmer, who knows, says he figures he's the best nose tackle in the league, so Linval doesn't care. I really don't think he does. They
don't. Fans
unless it means money in their contract.
I was gonna ask that. I think isn't that more of like an all-pro thing?
I think so, because I think even contract people know that the Pro Bowl is a farce.
Yeah, probably right.
And you never.
But hey, how about Adam Thielen?
Yay!
Yep.
Making it, and he's a starter too.
Yep.
He and Julio.
Wow.
Well, he should be. His numbers warranted. They couldn't. You almost couldn't not get him. And it's kind of interesting listening to Stefan Diggs talk about that today, because he says, "Oh, I'm really happy for him. Anybody in our room does it. And you love hearing him say that. You wonder how totally honest that is, and I hope it is. Stefan's a good guy, but you wonder, a guy who had been touted heretofore as the number one guy, and keeps getting injured and can't put up the numbers. And so it was nice to see him at least espousing that team ethos that says, we anybody in our room makes it, we're all for it, because we're a team here. So.
I have a feeling that Diggs is going to tear up the postseason.
That's not a bad.
I think the teams are going to obviously try to shut down Thielen, and Diggs has been what Diggs does, gets injured, comes back and kind of disappears. He's kind of done that his whole career.
We got to win this Packers game, this Christmas Eve game first.
Yeah, and it got a lot easier with the news that Aaron Rodgers valiantly tried to return. There was a lot of articles out there basically saying that there was no point for him returning to the Panthers game because the team was such a mess anyway.
Scored. He had 3 touchdown passes.
Yeah, he did
he was
everything.
Really bad in that game.
I didn't watch
He's
it. But
Aaron Rodgers bad. He's not bad.
Yeah, no, he was Tavares Jackson bad. I watched that game. He was not Aaron Rodgers at all. He was abandoning clean pockets. He was underthrow. All of his interceptions were on these like hideous underthrows. His touchdowns, one of them was like a little 2-yard flip pass that he like shot to Randall Cobb with nobody around him, and Randall Cobb created the whole touchdown. There was another one that was wide open. That's a game you got to watch to look at like just how much of a mess he and that whole team is. They're really, really dysfunctional right now.
Thank you, Anthony Barr. Did I say that?
Yeah, I heard.
Thank you, Ted Thompson and Mike McCarthy and Dom Capers.
Yeah.
Dom Capers is trash.
I heard that he like had no velocity on his ball whatsoever.
Yeah, those interceptions were ugly, but he just didn't. He was like skittish and happy feet, and his mechanics were bad. I mean, he didn't look like an NFL quarterback, let alone an elite one.
Really? Wow.
It was kind of sad to watch, honestly.
I know
was that on par when you were watching the Vikings game? I was wondering how you saw it.
No, I have Game Pass. I pulled it up later.
I know we talked about. I think was this last week. Yeah, it might have been where I posed the question: who you'd rather face in the playoffs, the Packers or the Lions? Which is kind of a moot point now, but
Packers now.
You know,
yeah, Brett Hundley, baby.
That team seems to be close to a rebuild mode, or at least getting rid of the coaching staff. So I know that even when things are good, the fans there were calling for McCarthy's head last season or the season before. I guess outside of the keys to the game, it kind of ties into it. But just Luke, if you want to start out and just kind of explain what you mean by dysfunctional in terms of their personnel or the scheme they're running, or is it everything?
So there's defensive mistakes going on all over the place. On defense they fell for 4 hard counts. Clay Matthews is washed and can't stand up to even the saddest of jukes. I mean, he got juked out of his shoes by Jonathan Stewart, which is hilarious. Devontae Adams might not play in this game. He had been having a pretty good year, and that's just like another blow. David Bakhtiari is probably one of the only bright spots on their team. I would say he's one of, if not the best tackles in the league. But on the other side, they have to deal with Jason Spriggs, who is a garbage fire, and Daniil Hunter should be able to create a lot. Brett Hundley, not only he in his last 4 games playing, so the 4 games before the Panthers game, he was under pressure a very average amount of the time, and he just dissolves under pressure. He has horrible stats. He takes way more sacks than everybody else. He can't scramble or get out of the way like Aaron Rodgers can at all. The second you get him under pressure, he just folds and turns into one of the worst quarterbacks in football. I think his passer rating under pressure in the last 4 games is like 28, which is a big sample to be in the 20s. That's like abysmal.
Much credit in my preview then, cheapers.
It's the team, and now the team doesn't have anything to play for except spite. And I would guess the leader of that spite would be Aaron Rodgers, who is not on the field. So I don't know what kind of emotion we're going to see coming out of the Packers this week, but I would expect a lot of heavy blitz packages. I would expect Tom Johnson and Daniil Hunter to have big days. Maybe Everson Griffin too, if they leave him one-on-one with David Bakhtiari, which will be a good matchup. I am going to call. I haven't decided what my bold prediction is going to be yet, but I'll get there by the time it's time. But it's going to be a lot of sacks and
what
a lot of
pressure. What is
pressure
going on with Jordy Nelson?
He's old.
Yeah, he is. And without Aaron Rodgers there, all season, I think he's just disappeared. And you figured something would happen last week, but he hardly had any catches, did he?
I don't know.
Whatever. It's interesting.
They're just a team completely out of sorts, and I think they need to really rebuild that organization, which is great news for us.
Yeah.
There's really no reason we should lose this game.
Tickets are available. Go on StubHub. You can find tickets to the Packers-Vikings game.
Or you can check Purple PTSD, because I will have some discounted tickets through Tickets Expert. They're about 15% off.
Excuse me, that's the place to go.
There's some fees, but with the fees, they're still like $10 less per ticket than StubHub, because both charge fees. So Yeah, check out the site for that. I'll send that out in the morning. Or actually, when this shows up, you'll see it on the site. But yeah, I mean, there's been a lingering conversation around the Packers for a while that this is a team that's squandering a golden opportunity, and only winning one Super Bowl, quote unquote, with a quarterback of that caliber is, going to be something that haunts that fan base supposedly, since they have such high expectations. But I mean, that's essentially what happened with Favre as well. So I don't know why I guess
Rodgers is a better quarterback.
Yeah, it just seems like they've never really put a complete team around him. In this day and age, having a GM who doesn't believe in free agency seems to be kind of odd. And
winning a Super Bowl will do that to you. I mean, they won the Super Bowl with him and McCarthy and Ted Thompson and Don Capers, and they haven't made a change since. What are the Vikings, where they make changes in mid-season to their coaching staff?
Yeah, they hired McCarthy the same year that we hired Childress, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, so he's been around for a while. I think that was the swindle. I think that they
Yep.
tricked us into hiring Childress because they put flyers out that they wanted him, but they really didn't. They just wanted us to get him because they knew he was terrible.
If they had Childress, they probably would still have Childress. Like, if they hired Childress that year, I think Rodgers would have just continued to win despite that, and they would still have Brad Childress, and they'd be saying fire Childress.
Probably. God,
The Packers suck. We should kill them. We should crush them.
And that's my prediction for the game, is especially considering, full disclosure, I had one of the worst flus of my entire life this week, and I'm still kind of reeling from it, if you can't tell from my demeanor. But I was super happy because I thought that my prediction for the Bengals game, which obviously no one heard because the show didn't record, I thought that I had beaten Joe for once in regards to predictions, because I predicted 41-10.
41-13.
41-13.
Flu deliriums you had going there.
Oh, totally. And I guess I still lost. So I think I'm down by over 100. I'm into 3 digits now for the season.
You are.
And so there's a silver lining to the fact that Joe lost in the Purple PTSD fantasy football playoffs. I didn't even make the playoffs. And he would have won it. He won that league last year, got a gnome. He could have got a second gnome that way, but we're also putting a gnome up for the predictions, and I don't want to send that gnome. I actually have it. I'm looking at it right now. And so my prediction for the Packers game is going to be a 50-3 Vikings win.
I love it.
Going back to when the Vikings
Style points.
Was it 98 or 99 when they beat the Jags 50-3? I think it was 99 with Jeff Jordan.
Then I'm predicting a 67-2 Packers win. No, I'm just kidding.
The price
I'm
is
sure-
right.
It's not good.
Yeah, no, it's I don't think the Vikings will score as many points as last week, even though because it is the rivalry, and they will get up, and the fans that remain that haven't sold their tickets to Vikings fans will be on the Packers, tails to do something. So. I think without Rodgers in there, it would have been a little closer with him in there. He'd have scored some touchdowns.
Or been decapitated by Anthony Barr for what he said on Conan O'Brien's show.
That could be. I'm calling a 27-10 Vikings victory, because I think they'll shut her down. They'll start. You could see Teddy if it gets out of hand.
I don't do bold predictions because all my predictions are completely wrong. But I was going to say, the big question is whether or not we see Teddy again.
Yeah, he's going to want to erase that stain from last week with a 0 for 2 and an interception. I mean, his quarterback rating wasn't very high, I don't think. But so yeah, I would love to see him get out early. Just put the Packers down just like they did, and let them think about the off season and golfing in Barbados and get Teddy in there. Get him some more time. Get him, let us see what he's got.
Yeah, there's also a note. I think the Packers are pretty banged up, and they're very banged up in the linebacker core, which is the same thing that happened to the Bengals. So we could have another big day from the running backs. And their secondary's always been bad. Their defensive line's good, but that's it. Last week, since we didn't, since nobody could hear it, I predicted Latavius would get a 100-yard day. I believed in him, and he let me down. He only got 76. Still a good day, but I picked the wrong running back to have an over a 100-yard day.
Gosh, how about that? That's close, though. That's kind of half points.
Hey, I had it. A lot of these that I've gotten wrong, I've had correct in spirit. So this week, I'm calling a Vikings win. I don't think it's going to be the blowout. As much as I just spent crapping on the Packers, it's still a divisional game on the road, and those are always tough.
It's not going to be 50-3.
Yeah, I think this one's going to be closer than we're comfortable with, but I still am going to call a Vikings win. And I'm going to do a little parlay with Brett Hundley. I'm going to say not only are we going to have 4 or more sacks, but 2 or more interceptions.
Wow.
Nice. No, my main concern is they get up early and they can rest a bunch of other people too, so you don't get them hurt, because the key of the postseason is having your front line healthy.
That's
true. I don't want to rest starters for an entire Week 17 game if the Vikings have a bye.
Right.
Because 2 weeks off is a lot off.
So
1 week off is rest. 2 weeks off is
just,
rest.
Just protect them. I guess that's what I'm talking about. Protect them.
Yeah.
So
if you're up 30 points in the fourth quarter, don't pull your guys. But
that's the only really scary thing. I was going to put that in the agenda actually, and it slipped my mind. But keeping everybody healthy and getting some of the guys that have been banged up back. I know Kyle Rudolph was a game time decision. I don't think Zimmer actually thought he was going to play at all, I think was his quote.
We're pretty clean right now. We only had 1 DNP today, and it was Tremaine Brock. Everybody else practiced.
Knock on wood. I'm getting a little, I'm not going to lie, guys. I'm getting a little excited here.
That's a good thing. You get to now.
Hey, it'll be a fun ride. If we lose in the playoffs, we lose in the playoffs. A lot of teams lose in the playoffs, but this is a great season, and most of these pieces are sticking around. So we have a good team, guys.
Yeah, and I do want also to shout out the work the guys that on our sister site are doing in regards to creating new Vikings media as well. They do a live pre-game show and a post-game show that you can actually participate in and ask questions. It's pretty awesome. If you go to VikingsTerritory.com, you'll see it, or if you search Vikings Territory on YouTube, you can find the channel there. I actually think our show is going to end up on that channel as well, since we're kind of integrating the 2 sites as we speak anyway. But
you don't want to see me on camera.
That's always been my thing too. And I don't think people want to see my initial reaction to a loss either, especially in the playoffs. That would just be.
We would never, after a loss, we would never be able to see Joe's head because it would be down on his desk and the camera would go right over the top of it.
It would be sprayed all over the inside of my shower.
Oh my!
Got lined up.
Joe, we got to talk. We all these years of Vikings losses has prepared you to be able to handle this. All these things you go through and talk about. I used to do this years ago. Let the OG help you.
So my dad says the same thing. It'll get better when you get older, but I feel like it's getting worse. It's kind of like, I don't know. This
is the year they have a shot. They have a shot this year, just like as good as anybody else's in the league. There's no team that stands out heads and tails above them. Could a number of these teams beat the Vikings? Sure, absolutely. But there is no team that is so much better, whether you look at numbers or personnel or coaches or whatever, that you should walk into that game and say, oh, God, we don't have a chance. So
yeah,
it's time.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, I think we can go toe-to-toe with any of these. None of these will be easy games, but we can go toe-to-toe with all of them.
Exactly.
I remember 2004, the Moss Moon game that we beat him in Lambeau.
Yeah.
And I remember going into the Philadelphia game the next week being like, well, we're not going to win this, but hey, it was a good season. I don't feel that way about any of these games.
Right.
No. Well, like we talked about earlier, we faced a lot of these teams, and even the Carolina game, which was...
I would love a second chance at the Panthers. I really...
I'm not afraid of the
That
Panthers.
could be your NFC Championship.
Yeah. I would love to see that. I would like That would be great fun to bring them up here and have the Vikings just the defense, because they were pissed off after the game, and you saw that against the Bengals. I mean, they were still going for it. Terrence Newman is pulling a interception out of his tailpipe, for crying out loud. They were
blitzing in the fourth quarter of that game, which is hilarious.
Yeah. Against his old coach, for crying out loud, Mike.
No mercy, step on him.
Yeah, heartless. I'm not afraid of the Panthers, especially up here. But it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, we got to play the Packers first. So
enjoy the season, Joe. Enjoy the season.
What day is Christmas? What day of the week?
Monday.
Oh wow. Okay, so Merry Christmas, everybody.
Yeah. Same to you.
Yeah. I probably should have realized that.
Happy Festivus to you all.
Get the aluminum pole out and watch me and OG do the feats of strength.
Don't do that. Spend time with your family instead.
I'm not even sure what he just said there, but
it's a Festivus reference from Seinfeld.
Oh,
You're not a Seinfeld guy?
I'm a Seinfeld guy, but I'm not a Festivus guy. I guess.
Festivus for the rest of us. Anyway, that sums up this week's show. Hopefully people will be able to actually hear this one. That'd be nice. But yeah, definitely I want to wish a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to all of our followers. It's been an amazing year because I'm a writer. And your support means a lot to us, and we're working really hard to bring some special stuff in 2018, and I think people are going to really kind of enjoy what we're cooking up. So, wanted to thank them.
Did the show record, Joe?
This one?
Yeah.
50-50.
Okay.
That's how we do it. That's how we do it around here. But, if people want to follow us on social media, they can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at purplePTSD. And at Vikings Territory. Again, check out Vikings Territory's YouTube channel. It's pretty awesome. And Merry Christmas to you two guys as well.
And to both
Merry
of you.
Christmas to you and yours.
And I guess we'll check in next week when the Vikings are one game away from going 13-3.
Beat the Pack.
Skol.
Do it.